Thank you very much for having us today, and welcome to the presentation on perception of stakeholders on blended learning in Australian higher education context. Before we move into details, let me introduce a little bit about myself. My name is Thinh. I'm from Deakin University in Australia, and currently I'm a PhD student supervised by the region, which is Chie, Adachi, and and that's what we discussed today is the key findings from my thesis, one chapter in my thesis of Vietnamese international student payment in blended learning in higher education, Australian higher education context. And my research focuses on three groups of participants. The first one is postgraduate Vietnamese international students. The second one is their lecturers or staff. The last one is university leaders. And before we move into the details, I have a quick question for you. So, in your opinion, how would you define it? What does it mean to you? So, I give you around 30 seconds. Think about it. For online participants, we can plug in. Who's ready for the answer?
10 years ago, it meant something quite definite, that you were actively using a mixture of media. Today, I don't know what it means anymore. It's like the jet age or something like that. It might be an anti.
Yes, in the past, something mixed.
Today, everybody does it, so you don't need a word for it.
Online and face-to-face, it's kind of, it's kind of the default. So it's the kind of teaching students, they come onto campus and having lots of online resources available on a VLE.
So it's obvious that each of us here today, we may have different interpretation, understanding, and blended learning. But it might mean different to each of us. And the literature say the same. Literature says that blended learning has been only contested concept that create a situation where we don't have any universal definition. That leads to the diverse. And there are some approaches to understanding what blended learning means. Some researchers, they pay attention to the dichotomy between online and face-to-face, like what you just mentioned. Blended learning in this case is a dimension between online and face-to-face factors. Other researchers, they pay more attention to the quality of the blending, how we blend it on our purpose, rather than just face and online. And other researchers, they use quantifiers to define blended learning, which could be the amount of time or the percentage of time allocated for online and face-to-face factors. And in some isolated cases, blended learning was studied with close relation to hybrid learning and free learning, because these terms, they share some common characteristics. So you might have a question, why I chose study postgraduate Vietnamese international students. And to answer this question, we need to have a look at the Australian higher education context. That year, there were around 500,000 international students enrolled in Australian higher education. And that higher education sector accounted for up to 46%. And this sector alone contributed around $35 billion to Australian energy. Let me give you a fun fact about Australian economy. There are 5 largest exports for Australia. The first one is gold, gas, higher education, gold. You can see higher education is the only one that doesn't mean higher graduates, but also create a lot of and why Vietnamese? Vietnam has been one of the top 5 sending countries to Australia. And personally, I'm Vietnamese background. And I used to be an international student studying in Melbourne for 2 years. And my master course was delivered in Deakin as well. So my personal background, enable me to convert the cultural society a bit. So I employed the qualitative method with interviews and thematic analysis as my research. And there are around 30 participants in my project. So now we have a look at the first group, Vietnamese international students, how they view blended learning. The majority of them, around 90% of students, they view blended learning from the inclusive approach with the combination on face to. You can see that even their data. For example, our current model of blended learning has to the online platform and offline classes. We have both online and offline components. So you can see the dichotomy online and face-to-face. Some Vietnamese international students they use quantifiers to divide their blended learning definition. For example, I'm currently doing about 80% face-to-face learning and 20% online learning. My course is around 12 weeks, and every week we have 2 hours face-to-face and 3 and a half for online. So you can see there are some quantifiers used in their results. And interestingly, in some cases, blended learning is viewed as hybrid learning. For example, it is essentially the combination of online and offline students. If you choose the other option, pick a date, go there, you turn the cinema. You can make it easily turn online from home. So you can see from the example, blended learning offers the opportunity for both online and offline students to join the lesson at the center. So it's pretty much hybrid learning. How we do it, how you do it, similarly to students, around majority of students, 71% of them, they view blended learning as combination of face-to-face and online learning, or combined use of both face-to-face or traditional classroom with online learning. Interestingly, none of these use quantifiers to divide blended learning. However, similarly to students, some of them view blended learning as hybrid learning. However, they make it clearer to their students. I understand blended learning as like hybrid learning. Or we actually call it a hybrid lesson. They're just the same. So they make it very clear that blended and hybrid learning, they are some synonyms. And interestingly, in 2 cases, blended learning also speed learning. For example, we record the lectures, we publish them to what the video before they come to the lecture. We have traditional classroom time, and students are learning at home prior to come into class after class. So you can see the patterns. Students are given lesson on knowledge before they go to ask for in-person activities. So in this case, blended learning is fluid learning. And just one example, our teaching staff, we blended learning as an important concept with reference to the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, blended learning itself is not perceived similarly across the world. Before COVID, face-to-face was a process. and digital learning was the second. But now, online is the first priority, and physical meeting are the second option or additional option. So in this case, you can see before and after COVID, the priority of face-to-face and online learning has been swapped. Thus, we can see learning is dynamic, changeable. So, and how about university leaders? They're not the one who directly engage in learning teaching process. How they view blended learning. And interestingly, Australian university leaders, they offer a very new perspective on blended learning. When I interview them, I have the privilege to interview two partners. They no longer use the term blended learning. They think that the term is outdated, no longer suitable, no longer reflect the reality of higher education. Instead, they consistently use the term integrated learning. So what does it mean to be integrated? Now have a look at their sharing. Integrated learning is the affordances of online and in-person, the clear understanding of who the students are, what they need, what their circumstances are, and to develop a powerful student learning experience. So what can we understand from their sharing? The first one is there are major shifts away from the common impression about blended learning. That peaceful must be the first priority. Online is the second option. So now, it's no longer which priority we have. It's more attention to how we blend, how we use the available resources, how we use it together to bring the best benefit for students. So there are some indications for research and practice here. The first one, my research team and I want to challenge the misconception about physical first and online second, which is very common in the community, international schools, which might stem from a culture that view face-to-face is less effective than online learning. It's not true when we look at the literature. And as such, we want to challenge the evaluation of online learning. The second one is understanding different blended learning perception is important for us because it contributes to this making education society and higher education. And when I have the interview with students and lecturers, I realized that there's confusion about the use of terms. For example, they don't see the difference between blended hybrid or integrated learning. Therefore, we call for a better differentiation in this term. And even though my project focuses on Vietnamese international students, but the education can be transferable to other cohorts of higher education. So before we end the presentation, I have two takeaways for you. The first one is there's no fixed definition of it. So we don't have to try to argue which one is the best, who is right, who is wrong. It gives us embrace a factor. This can be controversial and evolving. And no matter where we stand on the perception on that, we need to put students first. Students must be the center in their learning and should be the core priority in the research. For the future, we suggest to look at very many perceptions on other students' cohort. We should have more research on integrated learning. Here, from my experience, more attention on the research. That's pretty much about my presentation. Thank you very much for our attention.